Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Latino Vote Podcast, your favorite podcast where we talk about the ins and outs of everything Latino vote with my brother from another mother, Mike Madrid. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing good. And let's be honest, most of y'all are favorite here because you get to hear my voice and my insight, and you get a little bit of tap dancing.
Have you heard my voice? Nobody wants to hear your voice. I sound like melted butter when I talk, for God's sakes.
You kind of do, actually. You do. I think what ruins it when they tune in, the YouTube channels where you scare them off.
No, this YouTube, I'm screwed on the YouTube. But if you just want to listen to a sultry voice, I can make it be right for you now.
We need to actually change the intro to have a little bit of saxophone in the background. So I'm
excited because we got our first guest of 2024. Mm-hmm. You know what makes better than two Mexicans is two Mexicans and a Puerto Rican.
Walk into a bar.
That could be a TV show, just FYI.
I'm looking forward to this. Adrian Carrasquillo, a dear friend of both Chuck and I for a very long time, writes for The Messenger, and he's been breaking some really good stories lately. But if you're not following Adrian on Twitter or other social media handles, we're going to let him pump some of those in a little bit. You're missing what's happening, especially on the inside of Latino politics, certainly in Washington, D.C., but does great coverage in the battleground states. Somehow he's got like an in with everybody in these campaigns. And I'm like, how the hell did he pull that story out of there? But he does. And so without further ado, Adrian, you've been on with us before. You helped us launch this a while ago, and that just tells you how much we all value your opinion and look forward to what you're writing and what you're covering. But you got a couple great stories that we want to talk to you about. Appreciate you responding to me, and welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks so much, guys. And I've got a source close to your podcast who told me that my episode was one of the most listened to ones. So now I feel, man, if we don't do a good job this time, that's really gonna suck. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. I told you before, I respect both of you guys so much. To be able to reach out to somebody that I've known for years, but also who knows their shit. I mean, it's really great to always be able to chat with you guys. I believe you guys were quoted in my Young Latino story that I did a couple of weeks ago. So we've been working on a lot of stuff. Do you want to jump into the RNC story?
Yeah, well, let's jump in just a second, but I do want to point out just how good of a journalist Adrian is when he's writing a story on young Latinos and he talks to the two oldest horses in the race. Tells you how good he is at this.
I did talk to some young people too, and then I said, we want to get these old stallions in here,
Yeah, I appreciate that. Appreciate making us feel like we're still in the hunt, in the game, in the way that we used to be. Yeah. But look, the reason why I wrote to you, and right when the story broke, sent Chuck a note and said, we got to get Adrian back on. We've got to talk about this story. And it's because this story, created so much of the narrative of the last couple of years, which is this Republican rightward shift. And what are they doing? And how serious is this? Is this actually happening because of what they're doing? Is there some sort of a silver bullet? Is it a Trump dynamic? Is it a Republican dynamic? It is a Latinx dynamic. Like, what is going on? Why are Latinos moving towards the Republican Party? Are they moving towards the Republican Party, and where are they moving? And then the RNC announces you can correct me a little bit, a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that they're going to actually start building a year-round presence with a little over 20 actual community sites going to Hispanic dense.
Sorry,
Chuck's
my bad. My bad.
That's a Rio Grande laugh, by the way. That's the Chuck going at. Chuck was saying that ain't going to last. He said right when the story came out, they ain't really committed. And lo and behold, Adrian breaks this story saying, looks like the Republicans have closed shop in all or most of these 22 sites. And so we wanted to have you. We'll link this when we shoot this out. We'll link the link to the story again. But am I getting the background right, or am I missing some stuff there?
No, you're right. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about the story, and I'm going to tell you how I put it together, because I think you guys will find that really interesting. But yes, 2022 cycle. So this is 2021. We start hearing the RNC is doing all these community centers, and then it reminds me. You guys know the Libre Initiative's been out there for over a decade, and they famously would go to churches and hand out turkeys and do all this stuff. And then, oh, by the way, they're handing you a pamphlet on the free market, right? So that's always been the Libre playbook. And then you're starting to think, well, wait, is the RNC doing that? They're doing Thanksgiving potlucks, and they're doing religious services, cryptocurrency workshops, even folklorico dancing, toy drives. And so that got a lot of attention. And every time one of these Hispanic centers popped up in one of these major Hispanic cities, you would see the media sort of running over to cover these stories. Look, a little background about me. There's plenty of people on the Democratic side that think that I do tough stories about Democrats. And, at the same time, I've done a lot of stories where I've hit up the RNC, I've hit up Republicans throughout the years, and I've said, look, no one's talking about what you're doing with Latinos. Talk to me. There would even be times in the leading up to the 2016 cycle that Republicans were spending more on some Hispanic stuff, let's say RNC versus DNC or different things like that. So I'm open to hearing about it. But I also don't like the hypocritical BS that we get, which is like the RNC was dining out on these headlines and talking about Democrats having their problems, which they do have. But I'm like, what's going on with these centers? So I got a tip. And this is the part that I thought you guys would find interesting, where I sort of keep my secrets on my reporting. I know Chuck keeps his and Mike keeps his on how you do your work. I thought on this instance, it'd be fun to actually walk you guys through how I did it. And I asked folks if I could talk about it, because sometimes people don't want to be linked to how this happened. I got a tip from Carlos Odio, who we all know, a couple months ago. And he said that his team curiously, had sort of reached out to, it had passed by where the Allentown Center was supposed to be, where the Bakersfield Center was supposed to be in California, and the other one in Pennsylvania, and that they were closed. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, and I always had it in my mind. I wanted to revisit this, but I also knew that I had to go to check out a lot of those centers in person. So, being where I am in New York right now, what I have throughout the years is connections in these different battleground states. So a group of between community activists and local Democrats. We're talking Wisconsin Democratic Party. We're talking local activists in Texas, in Las Vegas. Had people driving over to these centers where the addresses are supposed to be. Got a nice, lovely spreadsheet on where all these offices were supposed to be, and people taking photos of all of them. So now when you're taking photos of empty storefronts or new businesses replacing or real estate locks on the old building, now I've got all the information. I've got the RNC dead to rights as well. So when I sent them the email and I let them know, hey, look, visited all these centers, they're all closed. That meant that they sort of had to really talk to me about everything they had. In Hispanic Heritage Month, September, they touted that they opened 20 centers, throughout the 2022 cycle. And now that number's down to 5, of which 2 of those were new in New York and in California. So that means that only 3 of the original centers, were basically open for these things that they touted. And why this is important, guys, they said that this was key to them getting Latino voters. Mm-hmm. They said you need to be in Democratic districts and Democratic cities. You need it. This shows we're going to build a relationship. Well, we all know you build a relationship by being in a community, not opening a Phoenix Center in September and then closing it at the end of December. Well, what are we doing exactly there? So this is the stuff that they hit Democrats for. Democrats deserve to be hit on plenty of stuff. But this is also, are you doing this outreach, or was it all, smoke and mirrors?
Now, look, man, not only was it a clean hit, but as somebody who's worked as a Latino operative in the GOP for, more years than I would care to admit. Well, that was a laugh line for Chuck, but he didn't say anything. Somebody who's worked in Latino Republican politics for a long time. I'm used to the commitments and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then suddenly the carpet gets pulled back, the plug gets pulled, and then maybe late in the cycle, if the numbers are really squirrely, they throw a small, what we call a show buy at something and kind of, buy, a few $100 on radio. We go do a press announcement that we're going to run $1 million. And of course that never materializes. I have never in my many, many, many years of doing this work seen a party at the state or local level go out and actually make this kind of a grandiose statement in the off year, open them, and then have the fucking huevos to cut and pull it back and shut these things down. Like that's crazy, right? I mean, and so what was the response? What does the RNC say?
Throughout the years, I've engaged a lot, and a lot of reporters have, with an RNC that's spoiling for a fight. They're willing to fight you. And there wasn't much fight on this. I mean, I think they knew that they had closed them. Look, here's what they said. They said that the leases ended with the chair's term. So end of the year, the chair's term ended beginning of January of 2023. And so, these leases ended. And that makes sense. It's understandable that there are terms and that, you can't go over if she doesn't get reelected, but she did get reelected. And, that leads to, if you really think that these districts in South Texas and obviously you should be in Phoenix and Tucson, they opened 2 in Arizona. Biden won by 11,000 votes there.
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't that seem like you should be keeping these in these huge Hispanic cities? So, they talked about that. Of course, it brings up the question of, when she won, why didn't you put money into this?
Right.
I heard from some Republican sources, the RNC disputed this, but what I heard from some Republican sources close to the RNC was that they are having financial problems. They've been having financial problems. There was a big Washington Post article in November.
They got to pay Trump's legal bills.
Yeah, and Democrats having almost double the amount of money cash on hand that they had. You go back to 2016, Republicans had more money cash on hand. So it's just sort of where they are, and they didn't fight me on much, and they say they're going to reopen some of these centers, right? So it gets back into the stuff that we've seen for years, guys. Okay, you're going to reopen in Las Vegas, you're going to reopen in Tucson, you're going to reopen in Milwaukee, but you're not open now, and you don't have this relationship. And why are people going to think that you are seriously interested in them beyond their vote if you're going to open up and you're going to pack up again in a few months?
I think there's a contrast here. Let me get in here on all of this stuff y'all talking about RNC and opening up. And I know about closing up a shop now. I know about when you don't pay your bills and they make you move out. I one time had to move me and my mom and my sister out of a trailer house before my stepdaddy got home over a weekend. I know about moving out of a place. And the point I want to make here is, it's so funny that this dropped. And then this morning, was it last night? Last night, a reporter called me from NBC and said, the DNC is going up in Nevada with Spanish radio ads, digital ads, Spanish newspaper, when Biden don't even have opposition, because they're just wanting to spend money to talk to the electorate in Nevada prior to the caucus, because they don't want to cede the communication to just Republicans in English. Now, to me, and Mike talk about this all the time, like, you can't bullshit us. We know when there's going to be a vanity buy, but there are several hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this ain't $1 million buy, but they were honest about putting up several $100,000 worth of Spanish radio and digital. In fact, during the primary, that's how you start talking to folks. And there's no doubt in my mind, in a place like Nevada, that there will be groups on the ground that all three of us know that will be working for a long period of time to mobilize, because we can't win that Senate seat unless they're doing this work on the ground. So it was really interesting to read this. And again, I think that the RNC was a little embarrassed by this, but I'm sure they're going to be competing, because they cannot win the places they want to win unless, as Mike Madrid says all the time, they can eat into the percentages of the Democrat support from Latino voters.
And, part of this was also, it was fair to get Democrats in that story, because Democrats been saying for a long time, the word that I heard most often, people didn't want to attribute their name to it, was that these RNC centers were a scam, and that people thought they were from the beginning. And, look, it was a real opportunity, I think, for Republicans. But what I heard from Giancarlo Sopo, who, used to do Trump's Hispanic advertising in 2020, was that some centers worked, like the one in Miami worked. But some other centers, it was basically movie night. There wasn't much going on to have this intersection between civic life and candidate recruitment and GOTV, and fun events for Latinos. And I think there was some pretty damning stuff in there. Daniel Garza, Libre Initiative, who has been a conservative group that's been out there for over a decade, like we said, this guy wasn't going out there to hit the Republican Party, but he was just saying that he's opened offices, he's closed offices, kind of how you said, Chuck. And he said you have to have the right people, the right leadership to steward those offices. And so, I think it's a combination. Are you in some cities where maybe they don't really want to hear from Republicans or conservatives? Do you not have good leadership? And how thought out was this? Again, those press hits are great, but then what does that actually lead to? What tangible stuff does that lead to?
Well, as a practical point, let me put this out there too. Opening an office and staffing it with a couple of people is not that expensive. It's just not. Okay. So like if they're saying there's money problems, or we had to cut the budget, or, it's the summer of the off cycle. I mean, there's no question. I work for parties, and there's nothing starving more than a political party in the summer of the off year. Like you're like looking under the couch cushions for nickels to pay that electric bill. I get that. But that's not where the meat and potatoes of real spending is. Just rent is just not that cheap at the end of a strip mall somewhere, and you're not paying these people six-figure incomes. So it really does, as they say, a budget's a statement of values. It's a value statement. It's where you put your money is what you prioritize. And I think the real damning part of this is it shows once again, this is not where that priority is. And I think that's first and foremost, I think the biggest challenge. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, as a journalist, how do you handle it when you get the call from the RNC to say, we're opening up vote centers in the next couple of weeks in Vegas and Phoenix and where all these other places that they've already abandoned? What do you do?
Oh, you mean when they do this year, like when they open?
Because they're going to do it again, right? They're trying to get a press hit.
Well, look,
am I wrong in saying that that's what this was about? They're running a drill. So you guys run a story saying they're running offense, and they never meant it. And look, I've done this a lot in my career. I'm ashamed to say it, but Chuck's done a lot worse. That's what I've done, right?
Don't talk about my life.
we run these offensive strategies to start driving a narrative. I've never done anything that ridiculous. If I knew intentionally we were going to pull back, I wouldn't do it. But political consulting is a different profession than when I started a couple years ago. It's just changed. And I guess my question is, how do you as a journalist cover that, knowing full well that they got a good media hit out of you last time? Yeah. They're going probably into the same markets, and they're going to be trying to get that same hit out of you and others next time.
I think that one thing that people misunderstand about when I write tough stories, I then want you to come to me when you have a good story to tell. I did that with the DNC last year, where, the first time they had talked about having issues with Latino men. And then I got an interview with the chair, and we talked about how they're trying to reach Latino men and Black men and how important it is to not have those voters feel taken for granted and to be spoken to. So I've always been like, I'm going to do a tough story, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't come to me the next time. Now, look, if they come to me the next time, you better believe I'm going to write, after closing all these centers, now they're reopening these. But we're going to then analyze, look, what can happen when what are you putting behind your Las Vegas office, behind your Tucson office? What kind of resources are there? The RNC is usually good, not just at spending some money in some of their things, their blasts that they let out, but also talking about how much staff they're going to have on the ground or how much volunteers. We can have an honest conversation about those pieces, but sometimes some places want to then go to the reporter who doesn't cover this so they can get, oh, wow, look, and I think that again, it was the part of me that was dishonest, or at least, it is sort of shifting the goalposts and different things, was that you want to talk about how Democrats and Biden and inflation and there's all these problems. And, oh, man, they were dining out on those press pieces in 2021, 2022, even the first half of 2023. And it's just like, this stuff is serious. You guys take it seriously. I take it seriously. And it matters that the community is not just hit, couple weeks, couple of months before the election, and then you leave. Because, there's a lot of folks, political observers, who are like, it's actually good, now that Latinos are more of a sought after group, that they're not just all voting for Democrats. This is good for the community to have both parties want to invest. And look, this was an opportunity. This was an example of them sort of not delivering, just doing what they said they were going to do in 2022 and not keeping it going. And that, to finish up, that is the problem now, right? So now if you return to those communities, you don't have, one of the local activists told me she was surprised to hear the RNC centers closed because she never knew they opened. She sees Libre out there. She sees Libre out there all the time. I've gone to, the Puerto Rican Day Parade in Orlando, and I'm there, and there's a bunch of progressive groups, and there's Libre, And so, and that matters. You're there, you're engaging the community to have those conversations. There's plenty of people who are like, I'm upset with Biden, or I'm upset with Democrat, but to offer an alternative, to have a conversation with them. But if you're closing up shop, you can't have that conversation.
They've done it really well in Miami. That's where, they have a different audience. Miami Cubans are different, but, it's just one of the places where the Republican Party has invested in having infrastructure there, having parades, having presence, knocking on doors. Y'all, field offices mean something, but they're not the be all end all. Like, you got to remember the old golden rule, right? Like if field is the most inefficient way to move voters because you can't talk to enough to make a difference in a big election, but it is also the most persuasive thing you can do. You're going to move more people when you have a personal conversation. So you have to weigh those. And when you're putting together a strategic plan, the field and the arms to arms battle as just one layer, me and Adrian's talked a lot about this in his reporting, is just one facet of a campaign. When Bernie Sanders won 70% of the Latino vote, is because we had 100 Latino organizers on the ground for over 6 months. We built those relationships while at the same time, as Adrian reported, spending millions of dollars on TV, radio, and bilingual communication. That's how you get voters to move. Guess what, y'all? It's a secret for you. That's how the white people have been doing it for a long time. So why don't you do the same thing with brown people? This ain't stupid, or I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah. I think a part that is worth, putting a pin in and re-examining in the coming months also is to what extent Trump sort of has that hold on the party and has them paralyzed, not able to do anything. From 2016 to 2020, Trump grew his Hispanic support. So there is an opportunity there, but just sort of waiting for Trump and the way that he owns the Republican Party, you would think, right, what Libre would have done, what groups like that, let's keep these centers open. Let's talk to these people. Let's have these conversations, prime the pump a little bit for when Trump shows up. And, look, in the past, Trump has complicated Hispanic efforts, but obviously he also has a draw to certain sectors of the Latino electorate. So that's just something that I'm intrigued by also, the way that they didn't do anything in 2023 with these centers that could have put Democrats in a bind.
I just can't get past the fact that it's just not that expensive. It's not that significant a commitment. It's just not. I mean, I can't tell you how many campaigns I've gone. You go meet with a donor who's the owner of a strip mall, and you ask him for a space for free, for God's sakes. But you find volunteers to just sit there. It doesn't cost anything. Like, even that level of commitment isn't there. And I appreciate the story, because this is, we keep talking about how it's unprecedented. All these parties are doing all this unprecedented stuff. But what is actually working, where they actually committed to, tells us, I think, a lot about how both of these parties and both of these campaigns, because both parties at this point are essentially arms of the campaigns, how they're actually approaching this vote as we gear up for what's going to be essentially a really long general election season, because we all know Haley's not going to win. Trump's got this thing about wrapped up, and the way that they're presenting a position to go into this campaign environment is going to be, more about the border than it was in 2016. It's a complete reversion from 2020, when they shifted 180 degrees and actually moved the needle with Latino voters. They're doubling back to where they were. They're shutting down these presence in Hispanic, Latino dense communities. And they're not even doing the fig leaf of saying that they're trying. They're not even putting up a good facade to say I'm trying anymore.
Yeah. And we've seen reports that Trump wants to make immigration his top issue in 2024, which he was not able to do in 2020 when it was COVID and the economy. We've also seen these economic markers that came out yesterday and has been coming out for the first couple of weeks, that in 2023, instead of a recession, that the economy, improved some. So it looks like if that were to continue to happen, the Biden folks are going to want to be talking more about actually economies improving, whereas Trump is just going to be hammering on immigration. So this will definitely, we will see the long tail, and we'll see how this plays out.
So another great story that you covered not too long ago was about the changing Latino electorate and the rise of young voters. And Chuck and I have talked about this a lot, mainly because it's been so long since he met that demographic, been, a young Latino in the business. And the fact that it's now newsworthy and it's so significant. Can you tell us a little bit about the background of that story and some of the statistics and numbers that you're dealing with? Because to me, there's so much fascinating about this story. And again, for me also, in many ways, it validates a lot of what I have been saying. I'm going to take a little bow here on stage. Chuck, go ahead and applaud. You can give us that applause line.
Can we please move on to the guest?
I'm going to take a long bow. I'm going to take a long bow on stage and say Mike Madrido's right again, and he's been right, and he's consistently right. And I think some of the demographics that you're writing about explain some of that. So, Adrian, give us a run on that story.
Adrian, please tell Mike how right he is. Here we go.
Well, absolutely. Look, let's take a little step back. Give you each a little bit of props here. Obviously, in 2020, Chuck knew the importance of young Latinos with Bernie, and now
we're getting what the people want. Go ahead. Sorry, this is great, Adrian.
Cycle one of the articles that I read as I was putting my story together was Mike's LA Times op-ed, where he got into some of the stuff that's going on, not just with Univision, but also with the changing electorate, how important that is. This is another story that I eyed at the end of the year, and I like to have some big stories come out in January as we get to the top of the roller coaster and we start going down. And it was this stat that blew me away, and I've been doing this for over dozen years now, and it blew me away because it was a Unidos poll of over 3,000 Latinos, an extremely robust poll, and it said that 40% of Latinos are new voters since 2016. And that, nearly 4 in 10. And that to me really, one of my pet peeves is when people act like the 2016 election was the first election in human history and American history. It's like, guys, there's been a lot of stuff before this, but for so many people, this was this very formative election and slash traumatizing election for some. But now you're telling me that in the last 8 years, this whole new cohort of Latino voters has come in. They have different priorities. One of the points that I was making in my story, they do not have the same affinity for the Democratic Party. And this is huge. Now Democrats need to reach these voters. What has also changed just from 2020 is that in 2020, I think it was like 3% of adults got news from TikTok, which means barely any. But now heading into 2024, Pew stat, as you say, Mike, gold standard, Mark Hugo Lopez, it's about, I think, 20% of, young people under 30 getting news from TikTok. To me, that number is growing all the time. And, there's so many people. As a former social media manager, I like to go on a social network, even if it's not really made for me, but I want to understand how it works and understand, sources and where news goes around. And you just see all these conversations happening around politics. And there's so many Latinos now that are young, that are able to vote. And a lot of the older folks and the electorate from 2016 has completely changed in many ways. And so I not only wanted to analyze that, but then talk to the Biden campaign about some of the stuff they're doing to reach young Latinos. And I think it just really reframed to a lot of folks the way the Latino electorate has changed.
Look, and I remember this piece, and I want to speak on it, and I'm going to talk about TikTok and the Bad Bunnies. Y'all get ready. This is going to be the TikTok election. Like, whether you like it or not, I've said it in the piece that Adrian covered. I said on CNN. It's because I see, and when I talk to folks and we're in focus groups with any Latino under 30, this is where they're on their phone all day long. And it just got bigger when we were all stuck at home during COVID, y'all. And then in places where me and Mike's been talking about, like California and New York, where there's not $30 million of bilingual communication going to our community, folks are just scrolling and seeing what their peers are seeing. It's not a shock, going back to what Adrian just said of elections before 2016. It's not a shock in the American lexicon. I hope I'm using this right. In the American lexicon for kids to act different than their parents. This just in, if any of you watched Happy Days back in the day, now I'm really aging myself, kids and the Fonz act different than old folks. So guess what? When you have a whole bunch of...
Never cite Happy Days again. We're going to have to move to 80s or 90s reference.
Okay, I don't even know what Happy Days is.
We're going back to Bad Bunny. All right, we're going to go back to Bad Bunny. Y'all stay with me. This is a big Chuck Rocha wind-up. So when you have all these Latinos that are turning 18 quicker than any other demographic, they just overconsume this information. So you have a party that really hasn't lost. The Democrats haven't lost their core Democratic, Spanish-speaking, mainly Mexican electorate. It's there. You've had a little shaving off of men in the Valley and other little things here and there, but for the most part, it's all stayed the same. The big change is this huge eruption of all of these young people who back in the day, there was only 3 TV channels when I was watching Happy Days. And now you can see Bad Bunny on 150 different channels on your phone, for God's sakes. And so when you're spread across that many channels and you're that young, you're just not going to get to everybody, and you're going to see an erosion. And that's my thought of your piece. So.
Yeah, and I think we see this, the Israel-Hamas wars is a good example.
Yeah.
When I talk to people and have said, yeah, if the election was in December, Biden might have been in some trouble. You know what I mean? In terms of how we talk about polls being predictive, not being predictive. And then people always say, well, the election's not today. That's the best thing you can say for Biden or for Democrats, et cetera. And, the war may be Who knows? Maybe over in the next month or two. And I think so if people start voting in 6-7 months after that, things have changed. What I think is important for Democrats and what I've heard also from them is now that Trump is being inevitable, I think that helps sort of marshal the forces. I've seen on TikTok where there's young people. I've seen on Reddit, they've got a subreddit where they say no stupid questions. So people go in there and they say, hey, look, I'm not an expert on this. Can I ask you a question on this? And they say, is it really true that it's going to be Biden versus Trump? I think that so many people, what we do every day, we're immersed in it. There's so many people that are like, wait. You're telling me it's going to be Biden and Trump again. There were people, some folks, the media is this big term, some folks, commentators, others, maybe it's Democrats, folks on the left, who engaged in this, that Biden could be replaced or would be, right? Like, we've known for a while it's going to be Biden, and we've known for a while it's going to be Trump, most likely. But there's young people who really were like, they did not expect this. I had this exclusive polling in one of my stories that showed that Latinos under 30 were more sympathetic to Palestinians, where Latinos over 30 are much more, and as you get older, much more strongly support Israel. So these are things that are currently an issue, and maybe they won't be an issue, 7-8 months down the road, et cetera. But for right now, it's something that Democrats need to keep an eye on. Yes, they're using platforms. The Biden campaign told me what they do a lot is like the streaming mix that they want to be on with ads, with digital ads. What you're watching, are you watching Netflix? Are you watching, HBO Max, different things like that. And as well as they did this like football thing, which was like trying to reach men in Spanish, ESPN Deportes streaming, but they're also trying to reach young people. And even when I would focus on Latino men, to Adrian Saenz, who's a consultant for the Biden campaign, they would say, well, if this is aimed at Latino men and young people. Every single time they would always say, and young people. So they've talked about setting up stuff that, this is happening right now as we speak. They're talking about setting up on TikTok, reaching out to not just these big influencers that we're used to that have millions of followers, the White House, invites to the White House, but then also sort of micro influencers. Maybe you're influential in Charlotte, where it's the most Latinos that are turning 18, or in North Carolina, which is super interesting. To me, North Carolina is always Lucy with the football. Democrats always want to talk about North Carolina, and I'm like, I've seen this long enough. I don't know about, they talk about the stuff they're doing, and then they lose by like over 5 points. But most Latinos are turning 18 there in North Carolina. Maybe there's an influencer in Tucson or in Vegas and on certain policy issues. So I think they have some of the right ideas. And the point of the piece was just to show how much of a challenge this is going to be. There's been polls that have shown Trump leading with young people. I don't know that I believe that when you have these small sample sizes. But if he eats into, or if people stay home, which we know that was part of why Hillary lost in 2016. If you stay home, you deny Democrats part of your base, and then Trump can win.
The best part of your article is when you quoted me using an F-bomb. I just want to say that it's the best part of it. It drives home the important point that I was trying to make very clearly. Chuck's heard that word a few times come out of my mouth, and I'll say it. You can't talk about the youth vote without talking about the Latino vote. And it has always perplexed me when people say, oh, yeah, there's this tepidness, there's this weakness with Biden, with the youth vote and younger voters. We're trying to address that. But there's no problem with the Latino vote. Like, it's fine. There's no problem. It's like, it's the same vote. Like, there's so much concentric circles. And that's why that data point that you talked, 40% of the Latino vote, this is still mind-blowing. I've been doing this for 3 decades, and this is still probably one of the most profound data points. 40% of Latinos voted for the first time in 2016 or more recently. This is an entirely new electorate, and either party or either candidate that is trying to suggest or say that they've got a firm grasp or understanding on this is completely full of crap. Okay? Because the only ones that I've seen them doing this work have been wrong, by the way. Okay?
No, I'm sorry. Everything you're saying. And then one of the things that I love to think about is sort of like the promise and peril with the electorate, right? And so Brookings had these incredible stats that basically young Latinos were part of the reason that Biden won in Nevada and Arizona in 2020. So that's, the Biden folks will say, we reached our numbers then, We're going to reach our numbers now. It's all good. As we all know on this call, the second you lose in Nevada, the second you lose in Arizona, there's not going to be a big, we're not going to know so much ahead of time. You lose, and then maybe you lose the presidency. And then maybe you've lost. Chuck likes to talk about the brown wall in the Southwest. So that's a little bit of something they need to keep an eye on, where exactly the electorate has now changed, morphed a little bit from 2020. They need to keep reaching out to these people. They need to, I wonder if as younger people see that it's Trump Biden again, and there's a lot of stuff that they don't like on abortion, on climate, on guns. If Trump has literally said that he's going to go on a revenge tour in 2025. Mm-hmm. So there's, maybe a lot of things that the young people will then say, I didn't expect that it was going to be Biden again, but I'm going to do this anti-Trump vote again, whether it's a pro-Biden vote or an anti-Trump vote. So that is to be seen. But yeah, this is an electorate that has changed so much, and I think it's really fascinating. It's just hard to reach people. Laughing about what Chuck was saying earlier, but yeah, there used to be a handful of networks, and now our attention is divided on so many platforms. So how do I get a message? And maybe I'm not even trying to make a joke about your age because I'm on whether it's Facebook or I'm on Instagram. Instagram ads work a hell great way on me, but when you're trying to reach young people, you've got Spotify, you've got YouTube, but
TikTok.
And TikTok, and it's just important. And it's going to be a huge part of the election. It could decide these swing states.
Let me ask you this as we get towards the end of this thing, Adrian, because I know we got a certain amount of time because you're a VIP. You're probably going to some club. Anyway, me and Mike talked about this last week, and I didn't even ask Mike that I was going to tell you this, but it just hit me while I was sitting here. Last week, me and Mike covered the layoffs at the LA Times. And, we started this by saying you're probably one of the most connected reporters in our community. Like, there are people that I know that just fear you coming around because they know you've got a source somewhere, and you've got good people because you've grown this because people trust you, and you report on our community. And I ain't trying to blow smoke up your ass. Good, because you come from the community. What me and Mike highlighted last week in the episode is that we get so worried that there's not enough people covering our community that are from our community. And last week, with a whole bunch of people losing their job, Mike had a great line that said there's just became a whole lot less Latinos covering our community. What do you think the future holds for reporting and the guys that do, or the girls that do, this hard-hitting coverage of our community, which just really you and a handful of national folks have done at a really great depth?
You guys know I'm a pretty positive, optimistic guy. I mean, I think that the media industry is in contraction. It's hemorrhaging, and it's really in trouble. And I think about a future where there's just New York Times, Washington Post, ABC News, NBC News, CBS News. Where else can you work when there's being so much contraction? It's heartbreaking, because when I do these, I broke these Univision stories, and I did these stories about Univision after the Trump interview and possibly tacking to the right. And, and in those stories, I would say people were talking about rumors swirling of layoffs coming. And so I'm talking to people. I'm not trying to get people in trouble. If someone's name or if someone ferreted out who talked to me, they might fire them. So I'm trying to be careful with protecting my sources. But then also, I take it seriously because I'm a journalist. So then guess what? I wrote that November, December, and here we go, January. 200 people at Univision got laid off last week. And now this week, 115 people at the LA Times. And as I tweeted, I had this tweet went, semi-viral, where it was basically, we lost so many Latinos covering the community, so much journalism, Latino journalism talent. Of course, the LA Times, they've got great Latinos. Maybe you cover movies. Maybe you don't cover the Latino community, but you bring your experience. You bring your background to bear. And it's so critical. And so, yeah, there's Latinos that cover immigration, and it's super important because you can talk to people in Spanish, and you can come from the border, and you can go to those communities, and you don't stick out like a sore thumb, and you can talk to people who are going through difficult things. But in politics, it's so important. And the perfect example of what Mike said, next time I would like the RNC to come to me. Latino reporters will tell that story well. If you go to a reporter, who is white or who has not covered this very often, they may say, oh, look what the RNC is doing. They're spending this amount of million. This is great. But you don't know the background of that, And so I see this when I drop into these. One of my big things, I never want to go into Vegas, or I never want to go into San Antonio or Phoenix or Miami, and write a story that people who are from there say, this guy was just this national reporter who parachuted in. So I'm constantly trying to stay in touch with sources and when I talk to people there, talk to people in the community to reflect where they're feeling, what they're feeling. And so, it's a shame, and it's happening in local media. It's happening out in national media. And I hope that hiring managers, and I hope that people at these large legacy media organizations understand, they love when diversity is in the newsroom, when news breaks. When news breaks, oh my God, we have this person that can go cover it. Sometimes it's something so tragic, guys, like a shooting in Uvalde, and you can have Spanish-speaking Latino journalists go down there to talk to people in the community, and your coverage is better and richer for it because you have these people. But when you don't have them, when news breaks, now guess what are you going to do? You don't have anybody to cover it. So I hope that they take this seriously. It's definitely a problem.
You have been a bright spot in a really tough time for media generally and Latinos specifically. Love reading your stuff. Give us your social media handles so that our listeners can follow you, because I'm telling you, if you're not following Adrian's stuff, you're not following the Latino Vote. And I can't say enough about him. You're going to be coming back pretty regularly. We're going to be bugging you a lot, as busy as you are, because I know that sometimes I write you and you're in some weird niche part of some battleground state writing some great story about something I never even thought of or was an issue. So you're doing great work out there. Give everybody your social media handles.
I'm at Carrasquillo, just my last name, on the artist formerly known as Twitter, which is now X. On Instagram, Real Adrian C. And I might, I'm thinking about some things for 2024, maybe a newsletter. We'll see what comes. But I appreciate you guys. I think your platform's so important. I can't wait to listen to you guys the rest of the cycle.
Thanks so much for coming in, Adrian. Chuck, last words, wrap us up, bring it home.
Look, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give the little thumbs up. Don't forget to write a review. Don't forget to remember that I'm the pretty one on this podcast. Don't forget to follow Adrian Carrasquillo. Don't forget to call your mama. Don't forget to tune in every week on this podcast. And until next time, thank you.